Good afternoon and welcome to a record-breaking take 3 of the next instalment of the 100 Greatest Artists of All Time. Take 1 failed in dramatic fashion when long hair in my moustache looked even worse than it really was, and there was an incessant clicking noise which I failed to diagnose. And it turned out that inadvertently, out of camera shot, I was doing this with a pen in all innocence. Take 2 failed when, in the home lab, after the most brilliantly delivered monologue I've ever done and will never be able to reproduce, there was a postman at the door, and I had to answer. So we're on to take 3. The other upset to the usual routine is I've been going down the list of greatest bands in alphabetical order, and only now I've come to realise that I should have started not with ABBA and A. I should have started with the numbers, like every other alphabetic list you see. So 10cc, today's group, should have been week 1. Apologies, 10cc. 10cc are the first Manchester band I ever got into. All 4 of the core members of 10cc had distinguished careers before 10cc were put together, especially Graham Goldman, who is still the one remaining member. In the 60s, he was a prolific songwriter for many a well-known band. For example, he wrote, amongst other things, For Your Love for the Yardbirds, Bus Stop for the Hollies, and No Milk Today for Herman's Hermits. But most impressively of all, as far as I'm concerned, he wrote the classic song Forever Everton, which is still heard every match day at Goodison Park. Pity he's a Man City fan, really. Eric Stewart, another of the 10cc founder members. In the 60s, he was, for most of the 60s, a member of Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders, a reasonably successful pop group of that time. Their most famous song was after Wayne Fontana had actually left, and they were just called Mindbenders, A Groovy Kind of Love. You might well know it. Phil Collins did a cover version. The first time that I know of the 4 members of 10cc all recording together was 1969. Graham Goldman, Kevin Godley and Lol Crane all came from the Stockport area of Manchester and knew each other through school and various local groups growing up. Eric Stewart was a Manchester man, but he came into their orbit a little bit later, because Eric Stewart invested in a local record studio. He bought a studio with a friend, and Graham Goldman invested later on. And this studio, Strawberry Studios, it became a sort of hit factory, if you like. The 4 members of 10cc cut their teeth in Strawberry Studios, writing songs for other people, producing other people, being session musicians for other people. Sometimes they'd work together, 2 or 3 of them had worked together on the same record. The first time aware that it all four worked together was 1969, where they were, well, a big thing on the pop scene in the late 60s in America was so-called bubblegum pop. Very basic pop tunes like Sugar Sugar by the Archies or Yummy 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 I've Got Lemon in My Tummy by Ohio Express. Well, these records were more or less put together, masterminded by one person, and one of these masterminds worked out he could get the records made cheaper in Manchester than by employing musicians in America, all over the various states of America. So he commissioned Strawberry Studios to produce 20 songs in a 3-week period. So the people of Strawberry Studios would write, produce, and deliver the songs. One such song was Sausalito in 1969, and the four people who played on it were 10cc. It became a hit in America. It was sold under the name of Ohio Express and wasn't a big hit, but it did make the top 100 in America. The first example of the four working together. Graham Goldman then left for America. He had some work in America. But the other three became a bit more ambitious. Rather than just churning out manufactured pop, they wanted a more serious band and got together and formed a band called Hot Legs. Hot Legs had a very big hit almost from the off, Neanderthal Man. It went to number 2. I'm the Neanderthal man. You're the Neanderthal girl. Let's make Neanderthal love in this Neanderthal world. It was a great song. It made number 2. It turned out to be a one-hit wonder because by their own admission they never really promoted the band as much as they should have done and didn't give thought to a serious follow-up record. So comes to 1972, Graham Goldman's back in the country, and the four of them, Graham Goldman, Eric Stewart, Lol Crane and Kevin Godley, get together and form this band 10cc. 10cc allegedly was the name suggested by Jonathan King, who was their early manager. A bit of a TV personality as well, Jonathan King, you might know him. He suggested the name 10cc as allegedly 10cc was the average amount of semen in a man's ejaculation. Whether this story is true or not depends which member of 10cc you speak to on which day. It might just be a myth, but it's a popular misconception if it's wrong. 10cc were art rockers. They had high production values. They made fairly laid-back rock, but they did rock at times. They did rock. And their first hit was this in 1972, a track called Donna, which was really a throwback to 1960s doo-wop. But the 10cc weren't a one-hit wonder because their third single was a bigger hit. Their third single, a track called Rubber Bullets, a rocker, all about putting down a riot in the county jail, made number 1 in June 1973, and shortly after, Dean and I, a similar type of sound, made number 10. They were now an established act, and although the singles from their second album, Sheet Music, didn't chart quite as highly, the album itself was consistent throughout, and it was a stayer. It was attracting not just a pop audience, but a rock audience, a progressive rock audience. And the album stayed in the charts for 6 months. But their masterpiece was the third album, Original Soundtrack. They released the first single from it as Life is a Minestrone, another rocker not that different from Rubber Bullets. Because they held back what they thought was their trump card, I'm Not in Love, for a bit later because they wanted to give the album longevity. And sure enough, with its lush orchestration and its quirky, ambiguous lyrics, I'm Not in Love, a song we still know and love today, did make #1. Nonetheless, I believe 10cc missed a trick because that wasn't the best track on the album. The best track on the album was a multi-part mini operetta almost, with different layers of sophistication and a real humour and a real variety of sounds. Une nuit à Paris. It is on my desert island playlist. It's one of the best 10 songs of all time by anybody in my view. They didn't release it as a single because it was 1975 and it was considered too long to be a single. But it was. There was another similar band at the time, another art rock band called Queen, who were just also rather, well, they're on the fourth album, 10cc on the third album, but at a similar stage in their career, and they did decide to release a similar track, Bohemian Rhapsody, as a single later that year. We did all know the result of that one. Could 10cc have been as big a band as Queen? Had they taken a similar path? Maybe. On the next album, on the surface, How Dare You, was another album in similar vein. But cracks were beginning to appear. The songwriting, the band divided into two usually. Goldman and Eric Stewart were one songwriting duo, and they tended to do poppier numbers, whereas Godley and Cream, Kevin Godley and Lol Cream, were the more adventurous, perhaps the more creative, you could say. But riffs, under the surface, riffs between those two pairings were occurring. And although How Dare You was a fine album with some good hit singles upon it, Godley and Cream were getting itchy feet because not all their ideas were being listened to. So they set up a side project, and eventually things got so bad that once the album was out, to the amazement of Goldman and Stewart, Godley and Cream said they were quitting. This was a band at its peak who just self-imploded. The two separate halves were never the same again. I'd have expected to enjoy Godley and Cream more. Let's deal with them first. Their first effort was a triple album in which they explored the possibilities of a new instrument, the gizmotron, of the gizmo, which was a device you could put on a guitar so it could make lots of different sounds. Kind of thing which was cutting edge in those days, but you can probably now get from any half-decent effects pedal. Nonetheless, with all these innovations, they were able to put out a triple album, but it was a little bit too pretentious and overlong. After that, they did get into the stride though, and they did have some top 10 singles. Wedding Bells and Under My Thumb were both top 10. Their third hit single, Cry, wasn't quite as big a seller, but it did boast a video which they made. And that was a bigger success than the song. And lots of people liked the work Godley and Creme had done as video directors. And that's what they became. They became video directors. MTV was just coming into its own. Video promotions were a big thing behind any hit record in those days. So they worked with lots of the top names. They did videos for Duran Duran, Peter Gabriel, Kate Bush, Frankie Goes to Hollywood even. As for 10cc themselves, they still had hits, but the songs by and large were getting a little bit slushier. Things We Do for Love, didn't like it that much. They did. Bloody Tourists was a successful album though, and it did feature Dreadlock Holiday, which was a number one, and that was okay. It was reggae, had a hint of reggae about it. Number one, not just in the UK, but also in Belgium, Netherlands, and New Zealand. But actually, that was the last hit they did have. Eric Stewart had a car crash. They were a bit slow getting the next record out. And in those days, there was much more pressure to get out regular records, one a year. You know, too long out of the spotlight in those days, and people forgot who you were. That happened a little bit with 10cc. Also, New Wave had become more and more of a thing, and they were just out of fashion. So they limped on, did a couple more records, but really that was it. Nonetheless, 10cc, I think, have been unfairly treated by history. They don't get the recognition they deserve. They're often compared, for reasons I don't fully understand, with the American soft rock band Steely Dan, but yet Steely Dan seems to get much more critical acclaim than 10cc. I don't understand why. For me, 10cc always were far better and had a bit more balls to their music. But that's the way it was. 10cc as a performing entity still exists. Graham Goldman keeps them on the road. They do concerts. But he knows that it wouldn't really be a 10cc record if he went into the studio without the other original members. So 10cc still exists as a touring band who are well worth seeing, but not as a recording entity. But they are well worth their place in the top 100 greatest artists of all time.